Farage, thanks for sharing some breakfast. What do you think, or what do you make of the idea that in UKIP target seats there are massive posters of Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon paid for by the Conservative Party? The Tories clearly see this as a way to kind of get back lost Tories.
I mean, there is a sort of air of desperation about the Cameron campaign. He seems to spend more of the campaign now begging UKIP voters to come back to him than he does telling the country what he actually stands for. It's not going to work. It might reinforce his own vote, but it's not going to work. People that have left the Conservatives and come to UKIP have done so because they feel completely let down. Promises on a referendum that he didn't deliver, immigration hopelessly out of control, wind farms springing up all over the country, and for many of them, gay marriage being brought in despite it not being a manifesto commitment. Those people that have left Cameron aren't going back. But he also misunderstands that actually the majority of UKIP voters haven't come from the Conservatives anyway. Maybe 4 out of 10 of our voters have come from the Conservatives, but a lot have come from elsewhere.
But it's a potent message for the sorts of people that have come from the Conservatives to UKIP that are concerned about Brussels. You can see why they're doing it. They think that they're the sorts of people that would be most concerned about the idea of a SNP-backed Miliband government.
Funny enough, what he might be doing with these adverts is he might be driving more Labour voters into our arms. Because I think, if you are a Labour voter and you're old Labour and you're patriotic, you're Eurosceptic, you're concerned about immigration, then I think, for a Labour voter like that, the threat of an SNP coalition really worries them. So we are appealing directly to Labour voters, saying, is this what you really want? If not, you better vote for what you believe in.
So you're making the same argument, a similar argument.
Well, the argument we're making is that if you're old Labour with those priorities, there is no chance of them even being discussed if Nicola Sturgeon is in a coalition, and it looks to me like she would probably wear the trousers.
When you look at the campaign so far, when we talked in Clacton after the by-election, your by-election win, and you told me you were indifferent to the idea of a Miliband premiership or a David Cameron premiership. That's changed now, isn't it? You would prefer a David Cameron premiership.
Well, I'm indifferent in the sense that it won't make a huge deal of difference. I mean, if you're running a small business in this town, it's irrelevant who's in Downing Street, because in effect, all the rules, all the laws that affect your business are made in Brussels, not here. So we are voting for a change of management as opposed to a change of government. The one difference is this. What I got wrong is I thought that Miliband would promise a referendum, albeit reluctantly. He's chosen not to do so. So on that basis, from the UKIP perspective, we would rather see David Cameron as the biggest party, though we don't trust him at all to hold the referendum on free and fair terms. But David Cameron as the biggest party, with enough UKIP MPs to hold his feet to the fire, is for us the best option.
Now, in terms of enough MPs, there were you were pretty bullish about 6 months ago. 20 MPs, something like that. You've modulated.
Do you know what I said 6 months ago to you was we would target dozens of seats.
Yes,
and that's exactly what we're doing.
Okay, but the reality is, realistically, you're talking. If you're lucky,
the reality is
a handful.
You haven't got a clue. And I haven't got a clue.
My crystal ball
and none of us have got a clue.
Misty, but
all I know is we've got nearly a fortnight to go. I think the public are getting bored to death with the sheer negativity of this campaign. Every single morning, it's the Tories say Labour would bankrupt us, it's Labour saying the Tories would close down the health service. We get various spending pledges made that clearly aren't funded. And I think the public are looking for something different. I'm very upbeat about UKIP's positive messages, positive solutions. I'm upbeat about the manifesto, which is now beginning to reach wider sections of the community. And I think we're in a position in the last 2 weeks where we can surge from here.
But in trying to ride two horses, right and left, you've said now that you prefer David Cameron to be Prime Minister. Only
because he has at least, albeit half-heartedly, promised a referendum. There is no other reason than that. If you take that out, the differences between the two, frankly, are pretty minimal.
But how do you hope? Are you giving up on the Hayward and Middleton Labour strategy then? With that now, with the Labour voters in the north, they don't want David Cameron as Prime Minister.
Good Lord, no. I'll be in Hartlepool next Tuesday. We are fighting lots of Labour seats in the north of England. People who vote for UKIP know that our priority is to get back control of our country and get back control of our borders. And whoever we have to do a deal with to make that happen, we'll do it.
In this swing Labour targets Conservative, where you're not going to win, where there's 2,000 or 3,000 UKIP voters that could make the difference, what's your message to them?
Vote UKIP, because actually, this isn't just about the number of seats we win. This is about the number of votes we get. This is about our percentage vote share. It's also about the number of seats in which we come second. Because I'm not just thinking about May the 7th, I'm thinking about a longer-term strategy for 2020. I mean, don't forget, the SNP in 2010 had a handful of seats in Westminster, and just look where they are now. And I feel if UKIP gets over this hurdle clearly with a big national vote share, not only will the party be in a position to be a really big player by 2020, but I also think every vote UKIP gets will fuel the argument for genuine electoral reform in this country.
Some sort of proportional representation, something like that.
I mean, years ago, Blair asked Roy Jenkins to hold a commission on electoral reform. Jenkins came back with a proposal called AV+. Basically, you get 2 ballot papers. One, you still keep the man or woman that represents your town, but there is a second ballot paper that makes you feel... Well, if you live in a safe Tory seat, when you're a Labour voter, why on earth bother to vote? This system would re-engage the public in voting.
And under that system, you could think that you would get dozens of... Because you'd have 15 and 16% of the vote would mean a lot more seats, obviously.
Well, I think actually, to be honest with you, if it was that system, our percentage would be a lot higher than 15%.
OK. Let's think about some of your manifesto pledges. Let me just remind myself. One of the first things you say is the Chancellor has failed to stick to the 2010 promise to wipe out the deficit. What would you have cut more or what taxes?
Well, let's just be clear. The coalition was formed, that ceremony in the garden on that lovely day in 2010, with one objective. That was to reduce the deficit to 0. It is still running at £90 billion a year. And I think more stunningly, the real elephant in the room in this debate, in this election debate that no one wants to talk about, they've doubled the national debt in 5 years.
So you're suggesting you would have cut more?
Yes, £10 billion a year minimum on the foreign aid budget, £10 billion a year on our EU contributions, £4 billion a year on the enormous white elephant.
No, that's for this Parliament, but you're suggesting that they failed over the past 5 years. What would you have cut more over the past?
Well, they've increased the foreign aid budget radically. They've increased our EU contributions. They've increased spending on things that we as a party don't believe are necessary.
So, scrapping the HS2 vanity project. Well, you know that the last manifesto was hugely enthusiastic about high-speed rail.
Well, luckily, the chap that wrote that defected to the Tory party, I'm pleased to say.
OK.
Actually, he wasn't in favour of HS2. He was in favour of better rail communications across the UK.
So, you'd be against HS1 as well, presumably?
HS1 had to be built. We have a Channel Tunnel.
So you're in favour of high-speed rail to your constituency and to your current job in Brussels, but not connecting London and Manchester?
Well, actually, we'd reached a point where, frankly, it was a bit of an embarrassment not to have high-speed rail coming across from Paris and Brussels.
So it's an embarrassment not to have high-speed rail coming across from Paris, but it's not embarrassing to have high-speed rail between our 2 major cities?
If you catch a train now from Paddington to Penzance, it takes 5 hours and 11 minutes. It was quicker than that before the First World War. There are parts of the country that are completely disconnected, that for modest sums of money can lead to upgrades of the line. The French have got high-speed rail. Do you know, the current HS2 proposal will cost 9 times per mile what the TGV in France will cost. It's badly costed, it's the wrong project, and anyway, Manchester's only 2 hours away.
So you want higher speed rail, but not specific project?
Yeah, I want better rail connectivity, which can be done incredibly cheaply, compared to a project that could cost 50, 60 or 70 billion pounds, and for which the private sector is unlikely to put in a penny, because these things invariably lose money.
So you're going to take £5.5 billion away from Scottish funding?
Yes.
You've obviously given up on Scotland?
No, I want a fair deal for England. I thought it was extraordinary to see the 3 party leaders in the face of the Scottish terror saying unconditionally they would maintain the Barnett formula, the method by which the Scots get 15% more per head than the English get. And frankly, they've just appeased Scottish nationalism. And when you appease people like that, they just get hungrier. We are not committed to it. We think it's unfair.
But that would mean severe cuts for for the Scottish people.
Yes, they wanted devolution, and frankly, why should people sitting in this cafe pay their taxes to give Scottish kids free tuition fees for families that have no prescription charges? It isn't right, it isn't fair. We've had enough of shoveling money over Hadrian's Wall.
So the Conservatives are now sort of adopting this mantra of English manifestos and things. Are you sort of competing to be the English National Party?
It's just hilarious, isn't it? You know, basically, every time UKIP places a flag in the sand and says, this is where we want to go, this is what needs to be done, they all try and ape us.
Why not rebrand yourself as the English National Party?
Because we're the only political party with elected representation in all four corners of the United Kingdom. The only party. You know, we have an MEP for Scotland. We came within a whisker of topping the polls in Wales. Our Welsh polling is just as strong as our English polling. We have a member of the Stormont Assembly in Northern Ireland. We are a United Kingdom independence party, but we recognise, with what's happened with devolution, that actually a fair deal needs to be struck for England.
Okay. Okay, well, let's talk about your signature policy, which is obviously leaving the European Union. You have said in your manifesto that you'll renegotiate reciprocal visa arrangements with friendly countries. So that leaves open the possibility that you won't get them and that we'll need a visa to go to countries in Europe.
Do you know something? Getting visas online now is a really very, very quick thing to do. It takes a matter of seconds. This isn't about queuing up, you know, outside a foreign embassy. Okay. All of this can be done very quickly, very easily online.
But you could contemplate that with a country like Spain or France, that we'd have to get a visa.
Well, I think there are countries in the European Union that are in many ways rather similar to us. Similar educational standards, similar healthcare provisions, relatively similar levels of wealth. And actually, you know, for the first 30 years of the European Union, the free movement of people was a non-issue. Politically, a completely non-issue. What went wrong, and I predicted this at the time, to a chorus of abuse, which of course I'm getting quite used to, but what I predicted was that if you let in 10 former communist countries, many of whom have not actually made the full transition to being Western-style democracies, and where the minimum wage, take Romania for example, is about 10% of what it is in this country, that you would necessarily then, you know, have a huge migration of people. And it does not make sense for Britain to have an open door with countries like Romania and Bulgaria.
But you can't guarantee that your policies won't lead to the need for visas just to travel to the European Union.
77% of people in this country want us to have proper border controls. I can quite easily see reciprocal deals with countries of a similar standing to ourselves, but with some countries things will change, and yes, there will be the inconvenience of going online to getting a visa. That is a very small price to pay to get control back of our borders and to be able then, and only then, to put in place an Australian-style point system so that we have a skills-based immigration policy and one that doesn't discriminate against the Commonwealth in favour of Europe, one where we can judge people simply on their abilities regardless of where they come from.
Do you think actually these are big historical moments, and the idea of a referendum in 2017, you look at the demographics of who's for and against the EU, who likes the purple passport, maybe an anathema to you, but some people like that freedom, and there's a clear old-young split here. And this may actually be your one and only chance.
Well, if you look at that passport, that British passport, what are the first two words on it?
European
Union.
Yeah.
So there are 485 million people effectively have that passport. I think that's unacceptable. And I tell you what's interesting about
well, you think it is, but you see the polling about younger people.
Hang on. Yeah. Let me tell you what's interesting about Eurosceptic opinion and about the UKIP vote. It is getting younger. We noticed it in the Rochester by-election, and certainly here, you know, in this constituency. And if you come out with me today on the streets, you'll be very surprised. The UKIP vote is getting younger and younger.
Are you prepared for 2 years of uncertainty and economic problems? We saw what happened ahead of the Scottish referendum with an EU referendum. Is that a fair price to pay?
I think the difference is this, that whilst the Scots had that referendum, I don't think that the Scottish National Party economically had a viable alternative. Right. You know, they were saying that oil would bring in 7.9 billion sterling in taxes every year. Actually, with the price of your school where it is, it would be just a few.
Now, hang on.
It would just be a few hundred
you
million.
have to fund your social care,
Yep.
a sovereign wealth fund based on fracking, which hasn't given a penny worth.
Yeah, well, that's a long-term.
penny worth.
Well, we're modelling ourselves on Norway, and that's a long-term aspiration. Short-term, that is, short-term that can't help people, but it is a long-term
It's in
aspiration.
your manifesto.
Yes, and it's something.
And the oil prices
it's
collapsed.
something-
It's not going to raise a penny for social care.
It's something we should have done back in the 1970s, and it's a great mistake that we didn't. So yes, long term, absolutely, that is what we want to do. But in terms of this uncertainty argument, Salmon didn't have an answer to the currency, didn't have an answer to the over-reliance on oil, much of which actually was in English territorial waters, not Scottish waters. We have a very simple answer. Our answer is this. Britain is now the biggest export market in the world for the Eurozone. They just take the motor car trade, for example. They sell us nearly 1 million motor cars a year more than we sell them. And I rather go along with the former Labour Minister, Lord Digby Jones, who said you could negotiate a free trade deal within 24 hours because the German car industry would demand nothing less. There is no other part of the world in which the argument gets made that you have to be in political union in order to buy and sell widgets from each other.
You, on the same issue, you've called this area we're very close to now, sorry, UKIP has referred to this area we're very close to now as a no-go area.
I haven't said that, no.
So you do not think that this area is a no-go area for British people?
I've learned a lesson, which is if I was to think that and make that comment, I would be so hounded by the politically correct media class that it's not worth the bother. So what we'll do...
Do you think it, though?
No. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go and ask people out there what they think. All right?
I've been already.
Right, and what do they say?
And plenty of people said no. There was a Polish husband of a Thanet-based English woman who was very proud of some of the changes. This is the point.
Really interesting. Well, I'll tell you what.
Some, I'm not saying all of them, and there were some people in the shops who weren't so comfortable.
I have knocked
There's
on
a
lots
mix.
of doors in Cliftonville, and people say to me, we would not walk down that street at night. That's their view.
This is fundamental, isn't it? Because are you appealing to a kind of old 1950s view of this country? Well, the reality of this area is that the holiday trade abandoned it, and then eventually migrants came in and filled in cheap property. It's not the migrants' fault. Do you blame the migrants for that?
Is the fact that people started to go to Spain on holiday a reason for an area like this to be filled up with Eastern European migrants? I don't
But
think
it was
is.
empty first. You're saying it's their fault. It's just there's a
I'm not saying
there's
it's
a
there.
chaos.
No. Oh, please get one thing clear. I've never blamed any migrant for anything. Okay. I blame the Westminster politicians for allowing this to happen. It is irresponsible and stupid to allow unlimited numbers of people to come into this country, many of whom don't have skills or even speak the language. That doesn't make sense.
But the fact that they came here was a result of other factors, not the empty and cheap property as a result.
The fact they came here is because they've come from countries, they've lived under the yoke of communism, they suffer racial discrimination, these people, in many of their countries, on a level that I don't think most British people even understand. So they want to come to a country where they're going to have a better life, and I completely understand that. But the problem is that large numbers of people coming to Britain so that they can have a better life has not meant a better life for millions of British people. And there does come a point where you actually have to say, we need to put the interests of our own people and our own communities first.
There's people here that from those communities, some of them from Roma communities from Eastern Europe, who have come to Britain and come to be schooled in South Thanet, and one of them became head boy and has made something and thinks Britain is the most amazing country for that because they were suffering racial discrimination in their home countries. Are you proud of the fact that Britain has educated that guy?
Unlike you, I've visited the Roma communities, and I visited the Roma settlements. I've done it in Bucharest, I've done it in Sofia, I've even been out into sort of deepest rural Romania. So I've seen how between 4 and 5 million Roma live, and they do suffer a massive degree of discrimination, and I feel very sorry for them. But we cannot have an open, unlimited door to all of them. That's the point I'm making. I want to have a reasonable, balanced, sensible immigration policy based on the Australian-style point system. And if we do that, by 2020, when you cover the next general election, immigration won't even be an issue.
Because it doesn't seem to be as much of an issue as you might have expected in this election anyway.
Yeah, but you spend too much time in London. If you actually get out and meet real people, you will find it is the #1 issue on their list. And I mean that. It is immigration and the effects of it on people's income.
Health and the economy.
Well, exactly. Look at the health service. The population has gone through the roof.
Staffed by immigrants.
Well, isn't it appalling that we're not training enough of our own nurses? Extraordinary that we're not doing that. Our population has risen since the early 1990s by nearly 10 million. And we now have fewer GPs per head than any other country in Europe.
So train more GPs in Germany.
We have a housing crisis. We have a housing crisis.
Build more houses.
We need to build one. We need to build one new house every 7 minutes just to cope with current levels of migration. This doesn't make sense. A booming number in the population. Isn't it marvellous? We've got a bigger GDP. Well, of course we've got a bigger GDP. We've got more people. Do we have a higher GDP per capita? No.
You want to exempt vehicles over 25 years from VED. That's a disaster for the environment, isn't it?
Is it? Is it? I tell you what's the disaster for the environment. Just off here, there are a whole series of wind turbines. Not only are they pig ugly, but we have to subsidise them hugely with taxpayers' money. They give us expensive electricity. And what it's meant...
Let's focus on this. Let's focus on this. At a time of a big deficit, you're going to give tax cuts to Top Gear viewers who are really wealthy and have classic cars.
I want to talk about the environment. Right? So what we've done is to give our manufacturers expensive energy. What have they done? Left, gone to India and many other countries where they produce their products with much lower environmental regulations and then have to ship them all back. Actually, many of our so-called green policies have led to higher global CO2 emissions, not lower. And against that, a few thousand classic cars is actually a rather small issue.
It's an intriguing priority, though, for the country right now.
Well, this is something. This issue is something that, of course, the British Parliament can't rule on, because this is all decided in Europe. And we have put things in the manifesto that we could do, but only if we're freed from political union.
Tell me about tampons.
Well, there we are. There we are, absolutely.
I wasn't expecting to be talking tampons with you, Mr. Farage.
No, nor was I, really, but there we are. We're a broadly based party. Yeah, so what we've said is we could remove VAT from sanitary products. But, of course, we're not allowed to do that, because the European Union won't let us.
Tell me, how's it going personally for you here? It's none of this. You could do really well in terms of the number of votes, and if you don't win here, it will be a failure. Obviously, personally, you won't be leader.
Well, I'm going to win. I'm confident, not complacent, but I'm confident that I will.
Has it been quite tough? I mean, some people argue you weren't at your best in the debates.
I think that's true, and I think that is true. And I don't think. I think in my desperation for UKIP to succeed, I don't think I got the balance of my working day right. Just massively overdoing it. And I'm now being a bit more selective, and I feel I've got my vim and vigour back. I've got my bounce back, my optimism back, and I just look at how we're doing in our key campaigning seats, and I look at the canvass returns coming in, and what's clear to me is this: our national vote share is holding rock solid. But what's happening is our vote share is going down in some of those battlegrounds where Labour and Tory are fighting very hard, and we're not, quite up to their level. Our vote share in some of those seats is dropping, as UKIP, as some go for Labour, some go for Tory. But in the seats in which we're doing well, and in the seats in which there's a perception that UKIP might win, our vote share is going up. So I am actually, with 2 weeks to go, pretty bullish.
And how's it personally? I mean, this is your national figures for the first time. Listen, I remember in 2011 at the European in Brussels doing the Eurozone story, and in 4 years things have totally transformed for you. I mean, frankly, it seems ridiculous, but I think we were fighting to get on the telly at that point to talk about the Eurozone collapse. And you seemed quite excited by the Eurozone collapse.
Yes.
It seemed, because it proved things have changed so much in 4 years. Has that proved personally a bit of a toil?
I don't, for one moment, regret giving up my own job, running my own company, and the prospect of having perhaps made quite a lot of money in the commodity boom. I don't regret it for 1 minute. I've followed my heart, I've followed my passion, I've done something I wanted to do, and do you know what? Most of it is just huge, huge fun.
One last thing. You refer to the metropolitan liberal elite a lot, and it's in your manifesto.
Yes.
But you are metropolitan. You are a fan of Gladstone the Liberal, and I would argue you've just mentioned that you could have made millions in the commodity boom.
But I didn't.
You could the metropolitan liberal elite.
No, I'm really a country boy. Point number one, and secondly, I think of the current political leaders that I am able to mix with a broader range and cross-section of society than the others.
But you think you're a Gladstonian liberal?
Well, I think in terms of wanting a smaller state and not wanting government to decide and micromanage our lives, yes.
Last thing, your favourite Prime Minister? Your favourite Prime Minister of the past 100 years?
Well, I mean, we're just a couple of miles away from the harbour from which the little fishing boats and Thames barges went across to bring back the British Army, so it's got to be Churchill.
Okay. Thanks for your time, Mr Farage. Appreciate that.